Resuming debate, the honourable member for St. Albert, Edmonton.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in strong support of this motion to call upon the Prime Minister and the government to appoint an Atlantic Canadian to fill the vacancy caused by Justice Cromwell. Mr. Speaker, since the Supreme Court was established in 1875, every government has respected Atlantic Canadian representation on the court. Every government until this government. Mr. Speaker, if the fact that this government has opened the door to shutting out Atlantic Canada from the Supreme Court is objectionable, Mr. Speaker, on multiple grounds. Mr. Speaker, it demonstrates a total disrespect, obviously, for Atlantic Canada and Atlantic Canadians, not to mention the dozens of high-caliber jurists and lawyers who are eminently qualified to fill the vacancy of Justice Cromwell. It also, Mr. Speaker, shows a total disrespect for regional representation, which has been a staple of the institutional development of the Supreme Court, and, Mr. Speaker, indeed, been a staple more broadly of the institutional development of Canada. And of course, Mr. Speaker, it totally disregards a constitutional convention guaranteeing Atlantic Canadian representation on the Supreme Court. Mr. Speaker, it was not more than 2 years ago that the Supreme Court, in the Nadon decision, held that Parliament does not have the unilateral authority to change the composition of the court. Today, it is not Parliament that is seeking to unilaterally change the composition of the court. It is the executive branch. It is this government that seeks to unilaterally overturn the composition of this court by shutting out Atlantic Canada. And a little more than a month ago, the Justice Minister appeared before the Justice Committee, and I asked the Minister of Justice, in the face of the Nadon decision, exactly what authority, exactly what jurisdiction does this government have to unilaterally change the composition of the court? And, Mr. Speaker, with the greatest of respect to the Minister of Justice, I did not receive a clear answer at that time, and I have yet to hear, since that time, a clear answer from the Minister of Justice or from anyone on that side of the House on that important question. And I suspect, Mr. Speaker, the reason I have not heard a clear answer is that there is a strong legal argument to be made that this government doesn't have the authority to unilaterally overturn the composition and change the composition of the court by shutting out Atlantic Canada. So, Mr. Speaker, what would the implications be if the Prime Minister decided that he would appoint someone other than an Atlantic Canadian to fill the seat of Justice Cromwell? Well, Mr. Speaker, obviously, Atlantic Canada would be shut out of the Supreme Court for the first time in 141 years.
Shameful.
And what's more, Atlantic Canada would be singled out as a region. It would be singled out because it would be the only region on the Supreme Court without representation. And of course, in light of the Constitutional Convention, there would be serious legal questions that would immediately arise, calling into question the constitutionality of such an appointment. It is, therefore, no wonder that this Liberal appointment process has been widely critiqued from lawyers and academics from right across Canada, from the Canadian Bar Association, from the Atlantic Trial Lawyers Association, and on and on and on, Mr. Speaker. But you know who hasn't raised any objection, who has been collectively silent on the issue of Atlantic Canadian representation on the Supreme Court? Why, of course, the 32 Liberal MPs from Atlantic Canada. That's who. Not a word, not a peep from the 32 Liberal MPs from Atlantic Canada. Not a word, not a peep from the Minister of Fisheries. Not a word, not a peep from the Minister for ACOA, the Minister for Atlantic Canada. Where is he from again? Oh yeah, I think Mississauga. Mississauga, that's right. The Minister of Atlantic Canada from Mississauga. Mr. Speaker, I guess the memo never got to the Prime Minister that Mississauga is in Ontario and not Atlantic Canada. But nonetheless, the Minister for Atlantic Canada from Mississauga, Ontario, has said not a word in support of Atlantic Canadian representation on the Supreme Court. So what do we have, Mr. Speaker? We have 32 Liberal MPs from Atlantic Canada who have been MIA, missing in action. Missing in action when it comes to standing up against a constitutionally questionable appointment process. Missing in action when it comes to standing up for 141 years of Atlantic Canadian representation on the Supreme Court. Missing in action when it comes to standing up for the eminently qualified jurists and lawyers who hail from Atlantic Canada. And above all else, Mr. Speaker, missing in action when it comes to fulfilling the core responsibility that they were entrusted by the people of Canada to do in this place, and that is to stand up for Atlantic Canada. Mr. Speaker, I can say that in the nearly year that I have been here, I've had the opportunity to become acquainted with a number of members from Atlantic Canada. And I can say that I genuinely believe that they are here to do what is right and to do their very best to represent their constituents and their region. And that's why it's so sad and so disappointing that on this critical issue they have been missing in action. But this opposition motion provides those 32 Liberal members an opportunity to join us in the Conservative Party to stand up for Atlantic Canada. They have a choice. They can stand up for Atlantic Canadian representation, or they can stand behind the Prime Minister's constitutionally questionable, objectionable appointment process to shut out Atlantic Canada. Mr. Speaker, the choice is clear. It will be interesting to see which choice they make. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.